So students, in the last video we saw there are three features of a cell: plasma membrane, nucleus and cytoplasm. Now today we will see in this video what is meant by plasma membrane or cell membrane. Plasma membrane or cell membrane is the outermost covering of the cell that separates the contents of the cell from its external environment. We saw environment means the area outside the cell. Now what is plasma membrane? It is the outermost covering, the covering of a cell. That what does it do? It separates the contents of the cell. Contents means whatever is there inside the cell, that is separated from the external environment. The plasma membrane allows or permits the entry and exit of some materials in and out of the cell. So what is the plasma membrane? The function of the plasma membrane: it is a thin skin-like structure. It allows or permits the entry. It gives permission to the different materials to come or go out of the cell, to enter or exit from the cell. It also prevents movement of some other materials, like whatever there in the cell is there in the cell. It cannot go out of the cell. It prevents, it protects. The cell membrane therefore is called a selectively permeable membrane. Why is it called selectively permeable membrane? Because it is permeable. It allows the materials to come and go out of the cell, but it is selective. It does not allow anything to come and anything to go out of the cell. A specific material only can go out of the cell or come inside the cell. How does the movement of substances take place into the cell? How do substances move out of the cell? Let us see. Some substances like carbon dioxide or oxygen can move across the cell membrane by a process called diffusion. We saw diffusion in the first lesson. It is intermixing of particles. Okay. Now here, in case of a cell, what is going to mix? The cell is there. It has an outer covering called plasma membrane, and materials easily pass out of the cell and go into the cell. So here diffusion takes place. We have studied the process of diffusion in earlier chapters. We saw that there is a spontaneous movement of a substance from a region of high concentration to a region where its concentration is low. So let us see here, something similar to this happens in cells. When, for example, some substances like CO2, which is cellular waste and requires to be excreted out by the cell. CO2 is a cellular waste. It needs to be thrown out of the cell, accumulates in high concentrations inside the cell. It accumulates, it gets collected in high concentration, in large quantity inside the cell. In the cell's external environment, means the area outside the cell, the concentration of CO2 is low as compared to that inside the cell. So CO2 outside is less and inside it is at a higher level. As soon as there is a difference of concentration of CO2 inside and outside a cell, CO2 moves out of the cell from a region of high concentration to a region of low concentration outside the cell by the process of diffusion. Now here in the cell, CO2 is produced. It has to be thrown out because it is a wastage. It is a waste material. And how is it thrown out? Because of low concentration outside the cell, low concentration in the environment, in the external environment of the cell. So in this way, CO2 moves out of the cell from a region of high concentration to a region of low concentration outside the cell by the process of diffusion. Similarly, O2 enters the cell by the process of diffusion when the level or concentration of O2 inside the cell decreases. Thus, diffusion plays an important role in gaseous exchange between the cells as well as the cell and its external environment. Water also obeys the law of diffusion. Not only gases like CO2 and O2, water is also transferred and thus it obeys the law of diffusion. The movement of water molecules through such a selectively permeable membrane is called osmosis. So here we will see what is osmosis. The movement of water, like we saw how CO2 and O2 moves, the same way when water moves, the process is called osmosis. The movement of water across the plasma membrane is also affected by the amount of substance dissolved in water. Thus, osmosis is the net diffusion of water across a selectively permeable membrane toward a higher solute concentration. What will happen if we put an animal cell or a plant cell into a solution of sugar or salt in water? Here, solution of sugar or salt is taken and animal cell or plant cell is put. One of the following three things could happen. Only one of the following three things could happen. And what are they? Number one, if the medium surrounding the cell has a higher water concentration than the cell, meaning that the outside solution is very dilute, the cell will gain water by osmosis. Such a solution is known as hypotonic solution. Here, if the medium surrounding the cell has higher water concentration than the cell, meaning that the outside solution is dilute. So since it is dilute, it will easily pass through the cell membrane and enter the cell. So that is why here it is said the cell will gain water. Why will the cell gain water? Because the water is dilute. It can easily pass through the plasma membrane, and thus we can say the cell will gain water. The cell will get water from outside, and this process is called osmosis. But such a solution is known as hypotonic solution. Hypotonic solution is a dilute solution, and inside the cell there is higher water concentration. Inside the cell there is lower water concentration, and outside it is higher water concentration. And for medium means here the medium surrounding the cell. Water molecules are free to pass across the cell membrane in both directions, but more water will come into the cell than will leave. The net result is that water enters the cell. The cell is likely to swell up. So in this case, the cell will swell up, bulge up, because it will gain water. If the medium has exactly the same water concentration as the cell, means the area outside the cell, the medium in which the cell is placed, has the same water concentration as the cell, there will be no net movement of water across the cell membrane. Such a solution is known as an isotonic solution. So in case of isotonic solution, water does not pass, it does not come out or go inside, it does not enter the cell, and it does not exit the cell. Everything remains as it is. So this type of solution is called isotonic solution. Water crosses the cell membrane in both directions, but the amount going in is the same as the amount going out. So there is no overall movement of water. The cell will stay the same size. If the medium has a lower concentration of water than the cell, meaning that it is a very concentrated solution, the cell will lose water by osmosis. Such a solution is known as hypertonic solution. Now in this case, the medium is having lower water concentration and the cell is having a lot of water. The water content in the cell is high. So naturally water will pass from the cell to the external environment. The cell will thus lose water. Why will the cell lose water? Because the cell is having higher concentration of water and the medium is having lower concentration of water. So such type of solution is known as hypertonic solution. What did we see in case of hypotonic? In case of hypotonic, the medium had high water concentration. So this high water concentration made water to move inside the cell. So the cell will gain water in case of hypotonic solution. In case of isotonic solution, there is no movement of water. So it is the isotonic solution, there the concentration of water is same in the medium and inside the cell. And third case is hypertonic solution. In case of hypertonic solution, the medium has lower concentration of water, means this water from the cell passes out to the lower concentration area, and so because water passes from cell to the medium, water is lost, the cell loses water. Again water crosses the cell membrane in both directions, but this time more water leaves the cell than enters it, therefore the cell will shrink, it will develop wrinkles. Thus osmosis is a special case of diffusion through a selectively permeable membrane. Now let us try out the following activity. We see activity 5.3, osmosis with an egg. Remove the shell of an egg by dissolving it in dilute hydrochloric acid. The shell is mostly calcium carbonate. A thin outer skin now encloses the egg. Put the egg in pure water and observe after 5 minutes. What do we observe? The egg swells because water passes into it by osmosis. Now here an egg is taken and the shell is removed, and the shell is now a calcium carbon. Now a thin outer skin now encloses the egg. Now this egg is put into pure water and it is observed for 5 minutes. Now since water content is more, high concentration outside the egg, so water passes into the egg and the egg swells. B. Place a similar D-shelled egg in a concentrated salt solution and observe for 5 minutes. The egg shrinks. Why? Water passes out of the egg solution into the salt solution because the salt solution is more concentrated. So what is concentrated here? Since in the second case the salt solution is taken, pure water is not taken. First case pure water was taken. So pure water means it has high water concentration, but here water passes out of the egg solution into the salt solution because the salt solution is more concentrated. It is more concentrated means water concentration is low, so water passes out. We can try similar activity with dried raisins or apricots. Activity: put dried raisins or apricots in plain water and leave them for some time. Then place them into a concentrated solution of sugar or salt. You will observe the following. Each gains water and swells when placed in water. However, when placed in the concentrated solution, it loses water and consequently shrinks. Thus, we can see then when it is apricots or raisins are put in pure water, they swell, they gain water. But in case of concentrated solution, since water content is low outside the raisin, outside the apricots, they lose water and they shrink. Unicellular freshwater organisms and most plant cells tend to gain water through osmosis. So in case of unicellular means having only one cell, freshwater organisms, unicellular organisms living in fresh water, and having only one cell, and most plant cells tend to gain water. They gain water through osmosis. How come? Because inside the unicellular organism the water concentration is low. Absorption of water by plant roots is also an example of osmosis. How come? Because what is absorbed by the plant roots? Water is absorbed by the plant roots, and this is only possible because of osmosis. Thus, diffusion is important in exchange of gases and water in the life of a cell. In addition to this, the cell also obtains nutrition from its environment. Different molecules move in and out of the cell through a type of transport requiring use of energy. The plasma membrane is flexible and is made up of organic molecules called lipids and proteins. Now here plasma membrane is flexible, it is not rigid, it can move easily, and it is made up of organic molecules called lipids and proteins. What are plasma membrane made up of? It is made up of two organic molecules, lipids and proteins. However, we can observe the structure of the plasma membrane only through an electron microscope. The flexibility of the cell membrane also enables the cell to engulf in food and other material from its external environment. Now, this flexibility of the plasma membrane, it helps the cell to engulf, to take inside the food and other material from its external environment. Because the cell membrane is flexible, it is not rigid, it can be easily moved. The cell can take in the food and other materials. Such processes are known as endocytosis. Amoeba acquires its food through such processes. What is endocytosis? Endocytosis is engulfing the food and other material by the plasma membrane, because plasma membrane is flexible. So amoeba acquires its food through such processes.